David, you were the one who proposed doing this Josquin piece with the group. Um, uh, what prompted you to suggest it when we were in meeting?
Well, we were talking about, something that could really employ the whole group, and that's 8 people. And I thought, well, 8 different lines of music individually is a little tricky. And yet, at the same time, being an amateur guitarist myself, I'm fascinated at the number of different colors you can get, like out of a chorus pedal. And so that, you know, just really obvious analogy with a chorus and a choir made me remember this piece that I'd conducted on a couple of occasions in concerts where I was looking to try and connect up the way that one musician pays homage to another. And so, I thought, oh, we should do this piece by Josquin called Nymphes des bois. And this was in one of our weekly meetings where we would, talk about, well, what are we going to do and who's going to get together with whom on which duet and all of this sort of these ideas that at that time were mostly ideas. And I remember, you being very quick with all things technology, suddenly said, "How do you spell that?" And I spelled it, and within 3 minutes, we all had a copy of the score, and that meant that okay, well, this is great. Let's try this, and it was a kind of show of hands. Yes, all unanimous. We all want to try and look at this. Can you figure out who plays what? And so um, I think the trick whenever you're in a group of equals is that there's no prima inter pares. It's just, everybody has really got the things that they know how to do. So there was an open call for, which part does anyone want to play? And as people said, oh, I'd love to do this, I could do this, and we sort of worked it out, then there was the question of how do we do it? And I suggested, well, I could make a click track that is um, flexible and is similar to the way that I would, conduct it. So that at the opening, you phrase through the first couple of bars and then you let it relax ever so slightly. And while these are not accelerandos or retardandos, if you were to put them into a digital audio workstation and try and find the click, you would find that regularity is kind of an illusion, that there's always this kind of breath and organic nature to the feeling for the tempo. And so, having done that, and everyone with the parts, we were kind of off to the point of, okay, let's start recording some stuff.
Well, in addition to being a very good choice for a unwieldy group of 8 players, it's also a very meaningful choice for our times.
Yeah,
You know,
no, because
we're speaking in December 2020, and we're in a very scary point in the COVID arc, and
right.
everyone's
And
lives have been disrupted. Musicians, at least as much as anyone's.
yeah, no, and this feeling of I think the thing for me with regard to um, the fact that life has a final double bar is that there is this sense of um, you get to the end and then it's really over with someone, and this is just a horrible um, obscene idea, because something that is so full of life, we can't possibly imagine it not having that life. And it's music has always been an excellent metaphor for this, because once the sounds stop vibrating, then they only continue to exist in our memories. And so in this way, the the idea for a musician to make a piece that honors a musician who's passed, whether it's Stravinsky writing the symphonies of wind instruments for the memorial um, of Debussy, or whether it's Pierre Boulez writing the piece in memoriam of Bruno Maderna, um, it's it's this sense that the idea of separation can somehow be transcended in music. And there's that wonderful film, in French, it's called Tous les matins du monde, all the mornings of the earth.
With the
It's a French
Martin
film.
Moret, the
Yeah, and the whole idea was, in one beautiful scene you have the musician Martin Moret. He's playing his instrument, and he conjures up his deceased wife, who's there, and she sort of says, "Quiet, I'm here to listen." And it's this incredibly sort of moving thing where a person is evoked in memory and in sound. And of course, this is what the Nymphes de Bois is doing for Josquin, who is lamenting the composer Ockeghem, who has recently died, and where I always feel that Milan Kundera is right. In science and in many aspects of technology, if Newton doesn't figure out differential calculus, Leibniz will. And if Watson and Crick don't find the double helix, somebody else will. Whereas when Schubert goes, that's it. We can all imagine what a Schubert melody is like. We can come up with pastiches of what these songs might be, or what these melodies might be. Or we can slightly retool some of the harmonic progressions. But once an artist is gone, once a creative spirit is gone, they take that sort of magic way of looking at the world with them. And I think that the thing which has really kind of knocked us all back with this, the sort of sequestering and quarantining and separation that has taken place during the whole pandemic period, has been this sort of foretaste of real separation, of permanent separation. And I think this is why it's so important, why in a sense this really is essential work, to bring back this idea of the life that is contained within beauty, and the beauty and the just voluptuousness and sensuousness and life that is in this rather slow-moving piece of Josquin de Prez is simply, a miracle.
now, of course, the original version, it's a vocal piece written for
Yeah,
a five-voice vocal ensemble,
yeah,
and we're performing it without the text. I think much of the intent of the music does come through without the text,
yeah.
but
Well,
can you perhaps talk a little bit about the interaction of the text and music in the original piece?
yeah, there are moments where he uses the text painting in a very careful way. Um, and so when we were working on it, I made sure to send through translations for everyone who is not fluent in 15th century French, to make sure that the ideas behind the words were clear, and so people could actually look at the score and say, I'm, I at this moment I am playing about expert songs, or I'm talking about um trenchant, cutting cries, and that knowledge of the text allows you to decide what kind of almost tonal register you want to get out of the sound of your instrument and the sound of your phrase. And so in a strange way, it's a little bit like listening to a conversation of actors on a stage, but in a language that you don't necessarily understand. Um, I've always felt that music is the language that we are drawn to as infants in our pre-verbal stage. So what we hear when somebody's talking is that we actually kind of hear the melodies and we hear the speech rhythms. And that's already communicating to us in a certain way. It's one of the reasons that, when you elongate a sound, automatically it starts to sound like singing. And you can get the reason why a lullaby is so terribly um, appropriate and effective for small babies who don't yet understand what the words mean.
It makes you wonder how deeply embedded some of those gestures are in our musical and cultural language. The perhaps the most famous passage of the piece is the roll call. Um,
Yeah,
Shortly before if you're watching the video, in the final section, everyone's on screen and everybody performs together. But in the quiet passage immediately preceding that, which is performed twice, that's the point in the text at which uh, they Josquin cites a list of other composers of his generation who had
yeah,
been trained by or influenced by uh, Akagem.
yeah,
And it's depicted with these falling thirds. And
yeah,
we hear that gesture as a sigh, uh,
exactly.
whether it's this 15th century piece or Morrissey from the Smiths being so sad,
Yep, yep,
and or Brahms' lullaby,
absolutely.
the minor third. There's something about that interval drooping that just connotes a sigh, and it's a gesture that's at least 500 years old.
No, and it's really interesting that passage because it never ceases to amaze me that there's movement up, so you can fall down, but there is this sense of the whole thing just going lower and lower and lower, like some branch of a weeping willow that seems to just go right to the ground and make full circle between roots and branches. It's the most amazing passage.
You referred very evocatively and grimly to the final double bar that awaits us all.
Yeah.
But in a way, this piece sidesteps it
Yes.
because it's sort of got a fall apart ending, which is a gesture we're used to hearing in indie rock music. But it's it doesn't really have a proper ending. It just trails off into a final sigh. And in the video edit, I depict it rather melodramatically by everybody disappearing from
Yeah.
the screen, and Gigi, who's playing the alto voice in the piece, gets the final note.
Right.
But it you could you could interpret that as everybody dying off, or you could
Well, and
interpret it as
you
there's not really a conclusion.
there isn't, and the other thing that's interesting about it is that at that time you can resolve it onto the open fifth of the piece. So what happens is that that's like the the elemental building blocks of the physics of sound. And so in that way, when it finishes, to me, it always feels as though it's gone right back into nature, as though it has this kind of organic sweep. And of course, the thing that's so evocative is that the whole poem is in French, and the cantus firmus is in the more antiquated language, I think, even then, of Latin and Church Latin, and Requiem Aeterna, Dona Nobis Pacem, Lux Aeterna, all of the sort of catechism is right there. And everything else is French up until this point where we get the roll call. And then the very final bars are Requiescat in pace for everyone. And so it brings it back to this sort of foundation of resting. And then it just sort of expands out into infinity in a most amazing way.
One of the great unknowns going into creating this piece was was tone production, what everybody would sound like.
Yeah.
And basically our raison d'etre as a group is that we all of us play some electric guitar, and we all of
Hmm.
us have varying degrees of grounding in classical music.
Yeah.
And that's not an unprecedented thing. Our group member Stephen Mackey is almost certainly the world's leading composer of contemporary classical music for electric guitar, and he's been
Yeah.
doing this since he was a young man. So it's not a brand new idea, but it's still a rather eccentric one. And one of the big decisions in interpreting this was what sort of guitar sounds players would make.
Right.
When I've grappled with performing classical music in the past, a lot of time it's very easy to default to using a very neutral, clean tone. It it isn't loaded with genre associations.
Right.
It's melodically and harmonically clear,
Yeah.
so it serves its compositional goal. But having 8 people plugged in playing a direct clean tone would also sound kind of bland and nasty. And one of the most
Right.
fascinating things with this is how each person um, chose a particular means of tone production.
Right.
In the soprano voice, we've got um, uh, Gretchen and Daniele playing, and they're playing the same part throughout. But as they proceed, you can see Gretchen's hand moving on the volume knob, and she's
Right.
swelling into each note. And Daniele is picking each note very clearly. And you
Right.
don't hear it as a separate voice. It's just this
No,
beautiful
it's,
composite soprano voice that sails over everything. It's just exquisite.
yeah. No, and it's, and Steve Mackey is using an EBow, and his volume pedal, so that there's the tenor voice or the countertenor voice almost ends up sounding like we've used a sackbut on the thing, or some reed instrument, singing
I hear
this
it's
this
stringy too.
internal
I hear a
voice.
little bit of the resonant whine
Yeah.
of a of a uh, of a viol da gamba there too.
Yeah, exactly. No, and there's that, it just almost feels as though there's sympathetic resonance coming from it, which there probably is from the other strings.
And there's a
And
mirror image of what's happening in the soprano voice down in the basso's voice,
uh,
where I'm playing along with James Moore, and I'm playing the notes cleanly with a crisp attack, and again he's swelling into the notes,
yeah,
and the result is that the bass line is quite clear and easy to perceive, but it's got an oddball resonance to it. It just doesn't sound like
yeah,
somebody plugging in a 6 string bass and plonking out notes.
right.
And
No, and I mean Heiko and I didn't talk about our Cantus Firmus sort of sound, but one of the things that I just adore on the electric guitar is the sound of the wound strings up high. There's just some, they have a and it may be my orchestral ears, um, have been used to being around a string section for a long time, but there's a kind of just overtone signature that comes out, that has a richness in and of itself. And for someone like me who doesn't play very well, just that sound is so tremendously seductive.
but
And
I mean that's I certainly agree with you, and maybe this is an example where your status as a bit of a electric guitar outsider comes to play, because I'm sure you know that's the register that most guitar players never touch. Uh,
well, and what was funny was that then when I saw Heiko, and Heiko's all down in the normal position for it. And I remember having um, talks with Steve Mackey, way back when I was first starting the electric guitar. And I said, well, I don't, how do you, and he said, oh no, as guitarists, we pretty much play everything right down there. It's not like violin. And, so I had to kind of unlearn my whole violin thing. No, it's not in fifths. And learn this sort of different language. But it's, for me, it's almost like, and particularly in this piece, there were moments where just the sound color, and we even talked about this, the possibility to not necessarily imitate, but evoke the idea that each one of the phonemes that you would use when you're singing it, you would be very careful to the particular um, vocal cavity, which will give that vowel its exact sound and the extra overtones and all of that. And so I think it was just that degree of um, care with regard to how am I going to play each one of these notes? Because there's no fast music in it. So it's not about, look how fast I can noodle. It's really about, how do I evoke the quality of what this line has to say with my instrument? And that was, that's given a richness that I don't think any of us could have, could have um, imagined. And you were probably the first one to be sort of aware of that because you were the one who did the mixing of it.
Well, it's for non-guitarists, one of the let's say unique things about guitar is there's often a possibility of playing a note on a number of different strings. Of
Right.
course, it's true on the violin. It's true on the
Sure.
violin as well. But to even to a greater extent on guitar, beyond the guitar,
Yeah.
the E above middle C can be rendered on all six of the strings,
Right.
and each version has a very different timbre.
Right.
And as you say, the choice of whether to play, high on a low string or low on a high string, you might render the identical pitch, rhythm, and articulation, but there's going to be a big
Yeah.
timbral distinction, and it
Yeah.
that alone provides a lot of the color in this
Yeah.
performance.
Yeah.
Um, Another interesting thing too, and this is something that a lot of us musicians are dealing with during COVID, is the counterintuitive way that this was assembled. For the way most of us normally make music is somebody counts off, or the composer picks up the baton and defines the pulse. And
Right.
at the time we speak, there isn't really yet a technological solution to playing in real time.
No, the latency and the amount of time that it takes for a signal to be turned into digital ones and zeros, and then to be transformed back out into analog sound that a loudspeaker or a headphone can give you, so that you can react to it, just adds too much time for people to really feel that they can be in the moment.
But the way
And
the way we the way we threaded that needle, I'm not aware of anybody following this exact workflow. Is we I'd started by making a sketch of the piece, playing all the parts, but
right,
simply to a metronomic click. Nothing
right,
intended to be final, but just to have a starting point. And then after that was recorded,
right,
you created your conductor track. And I can't think
right.
of examples where the conductor had his or her say, once the piece was already propagating through space.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember talking once with the composer John Williams about some of his film scores, and and I said it was particularly one of the pieces that I adore doing in concert is the Jurassic Park suite that he's made. And there are a couple of modulations in it that are so perfectly orchestrated. And when you set them down, you just want to, the earth needs to shake like a brontosaurus putting its foot down. And, and I remember asking him, I said, but you don't necessarily do that in the film. And he said, "Oh, David, when we recorded it, none of us knew the music," which seemed like such a remarkable thing. But of course, the music, by the time they had it all copied and they were there in the studio and they needed to record it to the film, was probably only a week old. So the actual ability to have lived with it was a different thing. And of course, what was different here is that, both with the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra and the BBC Symphony Chorus, these are works that I have, it's a work that I have conducted. And so I know the sound not only of what I would hear in my head as I'm thinking about it, but also kind of how it works in different acoustics. And so, that meant that I could sort of sit down and imagine the sound internally in my head and just make the click track and move the tempo in such a way that the final result was one that did have this kind of ebb and flow of a natural acoustic performance.
But it sounds like it, but it was such an elaborate workaround. So you sent to me an audio a click track with your
Yeah,
and it's a very flexible one. There's a great deal of
yeah,
tempo variation in this, and I imported that into the software that most of us use, Logic Pro, and use that to define the
right,
tempo of the track, and then literally retimed portions of the music to retroactively follow your click. Um,
right.
fortunately, it
No,
didn't
and
end. Fortunately, it didn't end there. As we circulated the piece among the group, people were actually playing to your click.
right,
But it's just such a back assward made necessary by COVID technique that
yeah.
actually worked out really well.
Well, and I think the other thing which was helpful was that in the score that we were all working from, I sent kind of ballpark metronome figures so that the click track wouldn't feel like, whoa, why is it suddenly speeding up? But that there was an idea connected up with this phrase is going to be a little bit quicker, this phrase is going to be a little bit slower. And that I think also helped give it a kind of a naturalness so it doesn't feel like anybody is trying to really kind of nail the thing. And this must have been tricky for you because there are the different ways in which people are approaching things. And so there's some of the attacks are you know, have really clear transients, and some of them the opening envelope is really, pretty generous before you get the sound. Um, so how did you line that stuff up particularly,
It
or?
was it was a very labor intensive edit, but the essence was already there, on the part of the players, and because we didn't record at the same time, um, as each player took on the piece, it was taking a step closer to its final form, and whether consciously or not, um, every player chose a sound and an approach that
Right.
didn't just match the texture, but fleshed out the
Yeah.
texture and added something. And the result is it's a sonority I've never heard before, and
Right.
it's a beautiful one.
Yeah, because some people recorded through amps, and some recorded directly. I mean, I just recorded directly into my Prism interface, and it went straight to the software. Um,
Which is another counterintuitive
right.
modern process. I believe most players used amps, but you and Gigi and I think Heiko all just submitted a direct guitar signal, which
Right.
put me in the position of kind of sound designing a performance that had already been performed, um, which was um, I stayed true to the spirit of what everybody played, but again, it's just a counterintuitive, backwards frontwards way of creating music that's pretty different from what most of us generally do, whether we're
Right.
playing classical music or metal. It's just the way music is done, and
Yeah.
the times and the technology have kind of forced us to do something in a. Uh, I keep using the word counterintuitive because
Yeah.
it's so unaccustomed, but the results sort of speak for themselves. It's a very beautiful piece.
Well, and the thing I don't know for anybody else, but when I saw the video for the first time of everybody, because it had come in, the videos were coming in, but they were during a period where I was, flat out with teaching and other work, and And so I only saw it after you'd put everything together in the single video. And suddenly seeing everybody together after hearing the parts was like, you know, moving beyond belief. Because, of course, this is the thing where you do feel so isolated. And and this original idea of Heiko's that on the Jim Jarmusch film, that, there are all of these different time zones and that there are all of these fabulous stories happening in all of these time zones. And that's um, that's the genius of, and the difficulty of being human is needing these connections. And so when you see everybody doing the connections and the places they're in, and how that then adds another layer of meaning and richness to the original Josquin, it is
Well, I mean, this may
quite
be
a
a bit
meaning.
of heavy-handed symbolism, but I tried to depict that in the video with black borders around everything.
Yeah,
In nowhere in the video do images of two players touch.
yeah,
There's always that 10 points of
yeah,
separation.
yeah.
Um,
Well, it's important to have social distancing.
I find that in graphic software, 10 points is a good is a good safe distance. Nobody's reported
Exactly.
symptoms yet. Also, it's that we don't often see that combination of people. The one exception is the classical music realm, where an orchestra
Yeah,
might include a great range of
yeah,
ages and physical types. But in most of our pop music, we don't see that. Youth is
right,
enshrined, or if you're an older person playing a popular music, you tend to be paired with other old people.
right.
And this is the first group I've ever played in that had. There's got to be a 40-year age span at least
Yeah,
between the youngest and oldest
yeah,
members, and that's that's kind of novel. I
yeah,
spent my life playing with mostly people roughly my age.
yeah. Yeah, that is one of the things that, and maybe that's why I'm so um, aware of this transmission, because in in great institutions, whether they're choral or operatic or symphonic, you do see this aspect that somehow the tradition of a particular group stays, even though somebody else comes in and they're new and they clearly add their personality, but it is just a new quality to the same musically philosophical idea, so that you can recognize the group um, just immediately, even though there are new people in it, because there's a culture that obtains, and and so the new people begin to understand that, and they bring their way of informing what that is. It's the most remarkable thing, and it is this um, kind of artisan nature of of working on something and crafting it, and then having other people who come in, and where they may not necessarily have the same experiences or the same background of experience, what they do have is a really great appreciation of what this craft is about. And that's the thing that then comes across.
Now, if anyone has watched any of our other Another Night on Earth videos, so far this is the only piece we've done that's featured the whole group.
Yeah,
Probably most pieces won't feature the whole group.
right.
We have various duets and trios and a lot of other things in the works. But
Yeah.
having been through this, what are your thoughts about creating more music for the big ensemble?
Oh, I would love to. Um, what's going to be interesting is to see. I mean, my being a conductor, megalomania comes with the territory. So you have to get a convertible because it's got infinite headroom for your ego. But my idea would be to to
Nobody ever
find.
says that about guitar players. There's none of that attitude among the guitar players in this group.
But the idea would be, for me, is okay. You have these incredibly talented people. Get them all together on one stage, and so whether or not it's a piece that comes out of this period where we're still um, needing to be in our separate corners, or whether it's a piece that we could figure out to play, when we're all together. I mean, there are a number of really talented composers in the group, and it may be that this idea of, wow, look what you can do with 8 players, will actually, spark one of them to say, hey, there's an idea that I've been wanting to follow for a long time. Like the piece that Steve wrote for me. Um, he and I have been performing together. He is either electric guitar soloist in his concerto, tuck and roll, or with pieces that I've premiered of his in various different continents. And so at a certain point, there was this, should really write a piece for you. And so I imagine that after this experience, there will be some others in the group who will say, hey, I have this piece that would work really well for all 8 of us. I don't think after an opening like this that we'll be able to say, yep, just a one-off.
Well, I mean, there's certainly in the modern era, some piano playing conductors have revived the practice of, conducting a concerto while performing from the
Yeah.
keyboard. So are you thinking like Telecaster and the baton?
Steve and I have joked about this, but and people sort of see me traveling with an electric guitar, and I will often quip that, if you don't plug it in, nobody can hear you play it, which in my case is a positive, because part of the thing that's funny is when you're lucky enough to be working with extremely gifted people, as I've been able to do, you both recognize that talent, but you also apply that to yourself. And I've only been playing guitar for a little over a decade, and so I just hear all of the things that I can't really do. And one of the aspects of this piece, which was nice, was that it allowed me to just focus on the beauty of a guitar sound, which frankly is the thing that kind of pulled me to the instrument anyway. And so, so I'm not one of the kinds of guys who goes into a guitar store and, immediately starts trying to play Stairway to Heaven to check out an amp.
Oh, I bet there's incriminating video out there somewhere. If
Probably.
anybody has footage of David playing Stairway to Heaven, Stairway to Heaven at 11 a.m. at Guitar Center on Saturday morning,
There you go.
please send it to us.
But I think it is one of the things that what is so impressive for me in this group is just the sheer depth that every one of the players has in their own way of approaching music, and to tap into that with everybody at the same time is just a
It is
monstrous thing.
it's overwhelming how
Yeah,
much talent and soul there is in this ensemble.
yeah,
If you're not familiar with the work any of these players have done under their own names, and you scratch the surface, you'll be astonished.
yeah.
Collectively, this group has created an enormous body of music. Uh, Probably you more than anybody, but
Well, but what's so fun is that everybody is really nice to hang out with.
I
I mean,
know.
I can't wait until we can all get together to have a drink and a meal. That's going to be
I
just
know. When is
awesome.
the last time you put 8 guitar players together and there wasn't at least one asshole? It's a lovely, inspiring group of people,
Yeah,
and I'm so proud to have this inaugural piece, and I hope it's the first salvo of many.
yeah, absolutely.